What if I told you there was a way to get a train network that was faster, safer, more connected, and cheaper to run with just one simple trick? Now don't click off that dial. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It's about through-running train services. So stay tuned. So to understand why through-running services are, in general, a better option, we need to understand what the alternative is and the issues are with it. Now with any train line, there's essentially two options, either a loop or a line. We will be ignoring loops, but that is a good topic for a future video. That leaves us with the humble line. Now how could you mess up a line? Trains go in, trains go out. Simple, right? Well, the big differentiation between train services is where they start and stop. Those points are called termination points, and that's where the terminal stations go. At those terminal stations, a handful of things happen. First, if a train needs servicing, it will happen here: cleaning, emptying trash and sewage, topping off fuel, and so on. Second, there will be some downtime for the crew, so they can eat, use the restroom, and the like. Lastly, there is an opportunity to change the train configuration, adding or removing train cars, and turning trains around if needed. Chicago Union Station and New York's Grand Central Station are two notable examples of large terminal stations inside of cities. Note how the tracks just end and all the trains reverse out of the station. And here are some examples of terminals on the suburban side of a line. So now we know what terminals are, why is it a bad idea to have them in our cities? The first and most obvious issue is land use. Remember Chicago Union Station and New York Grand Central Station? They're absolutely massive, and even with most of the infrastructure underground, it still poses a myriad of issues, like being hard to modify and difficult to work around in general. City terminals are also generally a single point of failure, so being hard to work on due to their size and being the only option for a stop in the city, terminals are generally frozen in amber, until a massive pile of cash comes around to tear up everything around them. Safety in terminals is also an issue, as any runaway train, while rare, would not have a safe way to be stopped. There is a long list of deadly train terminal accidents, which have brought about rules on how fast a train can enter a terminal, which brings up the capacity issue in two parts. First, with how slow trains must go in entering a terminal for safety concerns, and second, when trains enter the terminal, they must exit the same way they came in. This is where much of the complexity of terminals come in, as trains that are on the platform need to cross over trains that are coming into the station. The more trains running into the station, the more complex the schedules get, and when schedules get missed, it causes cascading failures due to the terminals being the bottleneck. Lastly, the trains that don't get sent back out on their routes, known as equipment moves, need a place to go. So they either cross over trains in revenue service, aka making money moving passengers, to get to a rail yard for storage, or they are moved away from incoming traffic into another rail yard in the city for the aforementioned train servicing and staff movements. Here comes our hero to solve the city terminal issue, through-running. The general idea being not to terminate trains in the middle of the city, but outside the city. A wildly simple concept with some huge benefits. So let's look at how through-running services help solve the issue of urban terminals and what systems already implement it. Let's look at a theoretical system to see a mile-high view. We have Terminal East and Terminal West, both with a couple commuter rail lines running into them. Currently, regional trains will enter the station, a handful of them will remain on platform for rush hour, and some will return back to the end of the branch for another run into the city. There will also be a few intercity trains which enter the city, disembark passengers, and then enter the rail yard for tomorrow's run. This exemplifies all of the issues before, so let's add through-running services to fix the issues. To do this, we will need a new piece of infrastructure, a connection between the two terminals, making them no longer terminals but through stations. Let's call this the Cross-City Tunnel, going under our city's downtown and surfacing to connect the east and the west. Now, instead of our regional services coming out in rush hour in the morning and terminating the city center, they will continue onto the opposite side of the city to the end of the line. For intercity services, we can now have them either continue through our city and go to another city on the other side, or just serve both sides of the city and go off to the rail yard waiting for its next service. First and most importantly, this connects two separate stations while keeping the people in their seats. No need for a connector bus or anything of that sort. Convenience makes the service more useful. Next, the type of service pattern that can be run should reduce dwell time. Dwell time is how long a train waits on the platform. This spreads out the passengers over multiple stations rather than one terminal, meaning less people get off per stop. Think of how much longer it takes a train to leave a station when people are crowding around the doors. This also means that there's less space needed in the city center to run more trains. By continuing the train service beyond the city center, storage yards can be located on the outside of the city where land is cheap and abundant. Now that the service yards are moved outside the city but still on a useful route, the train can continue in revenue service longer, which means less time moving trains around without passengers inside of them. This configuration is also safer at higher speeds, since trains can enter the city center stations at the same speed they would for any other station, not needing to consider that the tracks end in the station. And the thing I think is the unsung value of through services is increased connectivity, making trips from branches deep into the suburbs fast and simple. Trips that many times are only easy by car today. I could go on and on about the other minor benefits like changes in land use, but I think you are getting the point by now that through-running services have many benefits. Enough theoreticals, let's look at some systems which were composed of terminating services and were updated to through-running services. Most famously, there is the Berlin S-Bahn, which is where many through-running plans get their name from, calling their systems S-Bahns or Stadtbahns, which in English roughly translates to city railway. This is a different concept than the American metro or subway. Back in the mid-19th century, the railways mostly focused around freight and long-haul passenger journeys, terminating on the outside of the city, with a linking line that ran through the city streets. As traffic increased, the railway could no longer run its giant steam locomotives on the streets, so a link was made in a ring around the city. An east-west link was built a few decades later. This project was called the Stadtbahn and put east-west trains on a viaduct through the middle of the city, increasing capacity, circulation, and connectivity. The next major connection through the city was a north-south link, which was completed in the late 1930s. Interspersed with these projects were some major electrification projects over the decades. With how early Berlin's city center Throughrunning network was created, why it is used as a main example for Throughrunning, and why it lends its name to the concept of Throughrunning services. This unique service not only allows for running plenty of train services through the city, but also fast intercity services and suburban connector routes around the city. Berlin's early investment in optimizing train circulation has been paying off for nearly a century, where today Berlin has the highest ride share of trips taken by train in Germany. Now you may think, is this only for Europe? Can the US not have nice things? And you may be surprised to know that we already have the infrastructure set up for an S-Bahn in a major US city. Let's check out one of the more modern Throughrunning schemes, Philadelphia's Center City Commuter Connector. Like many cities in the US, the current passenger rail network was made up of rail infrastructure from multiple former freight rail companies. The Reading Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad in this case. The connector linked these two disparate systems with a 4-track tunnel. This allowed for the Reading Railroad Terminal to be reused as a market and increased the theoretical throughput for both systems. Now all the connector is, subjectively, underused by SEPTA. There are plans to change this if the agency goes through with one of its proposals for metro-like frequency. Why this matters is because these lines went from underused freight and suburban commuter lines to what can be a suburban metro with frequent electrified trains and suburban to suburban connections through the middle of the city. Something we should strive for with many of our existing, unconnected legacy rail lines, making them into true rail networks. Also worth noting, this was done fairly recently, completing in 1984 for a fairly reasonable price in today's dollars. Hopefully the benefits of unifying and electrifying a current rail network becomes a priority of politicians as we continue to need ways to efficiently and cleanly move people around our growing cities. If you like this content, please subscribe and consider leaving a tip on YouTube below or on my Ko-Fi page, where you can also get access to my Discord and talk to me directly. Thanks to all the people who have supported the channel already, and goodbye for now.